Okay, hey. Hey everybody, how you doing? Tekking101 here. Well, my power's finally back on, so let's do the video that I was supposed to do yesterday today. That sound like a good idea to you? That sounds like a good idea to me, Barry. This will be a video on the Great Pirate Era. Oh yes, I know that well. The Great Pirate Era. Pirate Era that's great. Great Pirate Era. Pirate Era that's well known for greatness in the piratey world that is One Piece. Great Pirate Era, indeed. Okay, so, by the way, it's my fault. I was messing with the Whitebeard mustache light switch in the last video. I actually flicked the light switch, and I think that's what caused my power to go out. So, I'm not messing with that thing again, okay? The power of the stash and of one of the Yonko is embodied inside of that lighting fixture, okay? So, we're not touching that anymore, okay? At any rate, here's a question for you. It's a question that got brought up in One Piece before, I think during Sabaody Archipelago when the Straw Hats were all meeting with Rayleigh. The question was posed, like, did Roger actually intend to create the Great Pirate Era? Like, did Roger know what he was doing when he was up there on the scaffolding and he declared to the entire crowd, "Hey, mateys, I got a treasure!" Where is it? You got to find it! You know? Now, here's the thing. You could have different answers to that question. I think right there at that moment when Roger was about to be executed and he declared to the entire crowd, I think it's different in different versions of it, whether it's in the anime, and I think it's been redone in the anime a few times, depending on the flashback. In the manga, it's probably been done a few times, where in some variations, I think there's somebody in the crowd, just a random dude in the One Piece world is like, "Hey, Pirate King, where'd you put your treasure?" And Roger did not speak until directly asked from the crowd. So that's the whole beginning of the Great Pirate Era. Roger was already about to be executed. He's like, "Well, me hearties, I had a good run. Guess I'll just lay down now and just let them run me through. Hey, Pirate King, where'd you keep the One Piece?" Well, since you asked, you know, so if that was the actual events that did happen canonically, holy crap, man, the world government would be searching for that dude. He would have like a 10 billion berry bounty on his head at this point. Like, random Sam that was just hanging out in the crowd. He ran a bakery at Logtown. He had a normal life, but he had to ask that damn question, right? If he did not ask that question, Roger, he wouldn't have said anything. But I don't think that's the real, series of events that occurred. I think that's just like one variation of it. I think when Roger was walking to his execution and he was all chained up and he had a smile on his face and he got up there and he sat down at the scaffold, I think Roger knew what he was going to do at that point, okay? Now, the question remains, did he know, like, did he plan this out, like, as soon as he ran into Laughtail and he discovered what the One Piece was, and, then he, disbanded the Roger Pirates and he went out on his own, went to the South Blue, got together with Rouge and, Ace, was conceived. Was he planning that out the entire time? And then he turned himself over to the Marines? Did he plan that out from the beginning? Or was that something he just came up with, like, that day? Because I find that way more hilarious, right? I think it's very indicative of Roger that after he discovered Laughtail, he realized, like, okay, we got here too soon, whatever that implies, and he's like, I'm gonna be dead long before that, the time comes for this to actually be relevant, okay? So I'm not gonna be able to see this new world, all right? But Roger was like, well, I could still have a kid, I can have a child, and my child could grow up and, usher in this new era. Still didn't really work out for Roger all too well. By the way, I want to just say this right now. It was stated, Roger was a bit of a ladies' man, right? So, the fact that only Ace was his child, that one's a little bit up for debate. You know what I'm saying? Because it was stated, I think, Roger, he was in various locations all over the world, and, maybe there could be some other children of Roger out there somewhere, like Ace's half-brothers or sisters or something. I'm just saying, it's not completely impossible, and I believe it was stated directly, like Oda said, like, if Ace, well, Rouge said that if, Ace was born a girl, her name would have been Anne. So that would actually have been really interesting if maybe Roger had another kid somewhere in the world, and it was a girl, and her name was Anne, and that's like Ace's half-sister or something. That would be kind of interesting in and of itself. But at any rate, so, after Roger, left Rouge, pregnant with Ace, he left, he turned himself into the Marines. You could say at that point, Roger was like, well, mateys, I did everything I could do. I guess I'll just turn myself over to the Marines. And he's just, prepared to die because he was gonna die anyway. But it would have been so funny if, like, the day before, or like the morning of his execution, like Roger wakes up and the Marines like kick him out of his cell and they're like, all right, Roger, king of the pirates, today's the day. Start walking to the scaffold. And Roger's like, all right, mateys, what is that smile? Oh, nothing. Oh, that would be fun if I did that. What? No, nothing. Let's go, mateys. Let's go. He's like the moment of the day it happens, he's like, oh, I'm gonna start some shit. And then he gets up on the scaffold and he's like, hey guys, guess what? I would give so much money for Oda to draw the scene that happened like right after that moment. Like, we only see a little bit of it. Usually whenever we see Roger's execution, the scene typically ends like right after the execution itself. Like, Roger will be executed and the whole crowd will like cheer. But I would love to see the scene like immediately after that, where for a fact the Marines or the world government officials that had to be there. I mean, we didn't really see them in the flashbacks. We only saw like the executioners actually do the deed. But you figure there had to have been Marines there. There had to have been world government officials there, right? It was the king of the pirates' execution, for God's sake. So that would have been great if after Roger's executed, he's like, find the One Piece! Huh! Everybody cheers, yeah! And then, like, a world government official walks out in the black suit and the top hat or whatever, and he's just like, oh, okay, hey, everybody, how you doing? Okay, calm down. He was lying, okay? I repeat, there is no great treasure in the Grand Line. The Grand Line doesn't even exist, really. There's nothing there, so go back to your homes and places of businesses. Sam, get back to the bakery. Everybody just chill. There's no great treasure. Ah! And they all like spill out of the freaking plaza. Keep in mind, you had Doflamingo there, you had Crocodile, Gecko, Moria, Dragon was there, for God's sake, Shanks and Buggy were both there, bawling their eyes out. Probably a bunch of other really relevant characters in the One Piece story were all there in the plaza on that day, and they just scattered. Moria and Crocodile were like, ooh, that sounds fun. Let's go to the Grand Line. And so they went off and did their own thing. Doflamingo was kind of doing his separate thing. Doflamingo wasn't really interested in the One Piece. He was more interested in like building up his own empire, like criminal organization. And Dragon, of course, I mean, hell, man, that could have been the day right then and there, because that was 24 years ago. That could have been the day right there Dragon decided to start up the Revolutionary Army, right? Very likely that could have been the case. And he's been running it for over 2 decades now. Very possible. So, what is the Great Pirate Era in the greater context of One Piece? We hear about this all the time. We're living in the Great Pirate Era. It's the idea of, like, romance and dreams, hence Romance Dawn and everything like that. The era where pirates' dream will never end. And it's about heading out to sea, heading out to this mystical part of the world called the Grand Line, which is filled with danger but also wonder. And at the end of the road, at the end of the line, there's a set goal. And that is Roger's treasure, the One Piece. That is the important thing to take away from what Roger did that day in the square of Logtown. That is the thing to take away from it. He set an end goal. Because this is the thing, and this is kind of ironic in a sense. The previous era might have been greater in the sense of having stronger pirates. Because before the Great Pirate Era, going back like 40-something years, you had the Rocks Pirates. And Garp even said, the Rocks Pirates kind of blow all these current pirates out of the water. Like, in terms of how brutal they were, in terms of their crew strength and everything. Like, if they were to revive at their full power right now, we'd be screwed. There's nothing we can do to, like, a revived Rocks pirate crew, right? So that implies, like, back in the day, pirates were a lot more tough, and there were less of them, sure, but they might have been stronger on average compared to the pirates in the Great Pirate Era, right? Of course, on average. So you got Luffy and Kid and Law and all the supernovas. They're pretty strong, obviously. But the thing is, and the reason why it was called the Great Pirate Era is because, not so much quality, but quantity. There were a lot more pirates. That started a pirate revolution kind of thing in One Piece, where everybody kind of set out to sea for that idea, for that end goal that Roger set, all right? So let's talk about the previous era a little bit and the turning point that what Roger did, okay? So, Whitebeard and some of the other members of the old guard, they still talk about the era before Roger's time. There was the time when Whitebeard was speaking to Shanks. Now, obviously, Shanks is a lot younger than Whitebeard, but, he was a child on Roger's crew back in the old era, and Whitebeard was talking about how, not many people remember the way that the seas used to be back in the day. He's like an old grandpa kind of figure, Whitebeard is. And it's just like, the fact of the matter, because of the suppression of information that the world government does, and there's no like Wikipedia in the One Piece world, a lot of those stories from the past, a lot of the events that Whitebeard recalls, like 30, 40 something years ago, the current crop of pirates and people, they just kind of forgot about, they don't talk about them anymore. It was even mentioned that like the song Bink Sake, which is such a famous song when it comes to pirates, it's such a ubiquitous song back in the day of like Whitebeard's era, like everybody sang the song. The Rumbar crew sailed, 50 years ago or 52 years ago when they were finally wiped out. So it was even before that. So they were part of this generation as well. Which also lends me to believe, like Yorkie and Brook and that whole Rumbar pirate crew. Yeah, they weren't like the strongest crew back in the day. Obviously, Rocks was like the king back then. But they were probably still pretty damn strong. And the crew that took them out, that used the poison weapons, that might not just be like a random no-name pirate crew. I'm still waiting on hearing about like, oh, maybe they might have been relevant, at some point Brook runs into the descendants of the pirate crew that killed his entire crew or something. Maybe we find out it was the Rocks crew. Who knows? I don't know, but we'll see. Anyway, Bink Sake was so popular back then, even now, like outside of like, because like Shanks, passed it on. Shanks always sang it at the pub in Fuchsia, and so that's how Luffy knows about it. It's some people it gets passed down to, but like all of the old traditions of the previous pirate era are kind of, phasing out for this new era. Okay, and even one step beyond that, you can go to what Blackbeard said at Marineford, where Blackbeard is trying to start like a whole new era his own, like Blackbeard's era of darkness or whatever, right? So you can even argue that we're kind of at a tipping point. By the end of the story, it'll be a new era. Either the era of Blackbeard or the era of Luffy. That's probably like the two directions it could be taken there at that point, right? So there were a lot fewer pirates back in those days, but the pirates that were around, I mean, they were a lot stronger because the Grand Line was a lot more dangerous. Even Paradise back then, Paradise like back then was probably like what the New World is now, and the New World was like, I don't know, some weird dimensional hell or something. Like, it's something completely different. Like, the levels of this were way more terrifying. And this was probably the era when the Grand Line was deemed the pirate graveyard, back in the era of Rocks and everybody. I mean, hell, it might have been the situation like Rocks, because of everything that the Rocks crew did, it was termed the pirate graveyard. That term doesn't really be used that much anymore, and that makes sense because of all this previous stuff that's kind of gotten lost. But maybe, yeah, back in the day, Rocks would just, raid islands up and down the Grand Line and just slaughter everybody, and that's why it was called the Pirate Graveyard, all because of Rox's crew, right? And then they disbanded, and the name kind of persisted, but the reason for why it was called that was kind of lost to history. A lot of that stuff does tend to happen in One Piece, right? And so, you had the Rumbar crew, you had the Rocks crew splits up, then you have Whitebeard's crew, and then you had Roger's crew, which, Roger wasn't part of Rocks, they were enemies. And so you still had pirates doing all that crazy stuff, but there was no end goal to all of it. Or rather, the end goal might have just been in that nebulous sense of freedom that a lot of members of the Will of D embody, a lot of pirates embody that, like, to cast off restrictions from the world government or the Marines, and a lot of pirates are like, we're just going to do our own thing. Now, Rocks had a goal of, like, ruling the entire world, and outside of, like, just what he said, like, he wants to rule the world! Outside of that, we don't know, like, what he was trying to do there. If he was actually trying to, like, raid Marijois Law, burn it down, and like sit on the empty throne? Like, what was Rox actually trying to do? Was he trying to get the ancient weapons? Like, what was his game plan, if he even had one? We don't know, but that was his own goal. Pirates at large were probably just out there to be pirates, right? And there was a lot of raiding and a lot of pillaging, and, you know, they were pirates back then, right? But then Roger comes along, right? And so I'm sure pirates back then, the world government, you know, they had their hands full dealing with them and everything. But then Roger happened. Roger not only found the One Piece and not only was crowned King of the Pirates pretty much unanimously by everyone in the world, like they just started calling him the King of the Pirates, but he just couldn't let it die. He sparked an entire new era with his death. All right, his last words were not just, you know, like, oh, well, I was Goldie Roger, I was pretty awesome, I had a mustache. No, his last words were, I'm gonna create a damn era after my death, all right? And it's gonna mess up it is gonna change the entire world. It's gonna mess up the government. It's gonna mess up everything. The balance of power could literally be flipped upside down through my words and my actions alone. And that was Roger, man, and that's what he did, okay? So Roger declares it that day at Logtown, and then every random person that might have just, like even Bartolomeo. Bartolomeo didn't come along until later with his pirate crew, but at the beginning, you know, Bartolomeo was just like a small town gang leader. Actually, I think it was stated that Bartolomeo controlled like over 150 towns all throughout the East Blue. It's just some random thing it was mentioned, but it was mentioned. So Logtown might have been his base of operations, but he had like control over all these locations over the East Blue, which I think is more than Arlong ever controlled. Arlong controlled like 20 towns, around Kokoyashi Village, and Bartolomeo controlled like over 150. So Bartolomeo, he was way stronger than Arlong. I mean, this is confirmed, right? Anyway, he was the real threat in the East Blue, right? But, you know, so anyway, yeah, he was a gang leader, but then he became a pirate because of Luffy's inspiration. Same deal that happened with a lot of other people all throughout Logtown. There were a bunch of other Bartolomeos to Roger, basically, right? And keep in mind, Luffy isn't even born yet at this point, right? So these are people that are just like, maybe they're just wayward, you know, they don't know where to go in life or whatever. You know, they're like, I'm tired of working in your bakery all day, Dad. Roger got executed. There's a great treasure at the end of the Grand Line. I'm gonna go be a pirate. Son, you can't be a pirate. You need to stay here and make pies. That was your birthright. Screw you, Dad. I'm going to the Grand Line. No, son. And that man started the Pie Pirates. He lasted exactly 2 hours. That's all he lasted. Mostly because his ship was made out of pies. It's not very buoyant. You know, it didn't last very long. But hey, he tried his best, right? But no. That's only a little bit of an exaggeration. You understand, there were a lot of people that thought that they could be pirates. There were a lot of people all over the world when that news spread. You know, if Morgans was still around back then, you know, big news, and he was spreading it all over the world. You know, that broke the story to the entire world, that there's this One Piece, this great treasure at the end of the Grand Line. Now you just gotta find it, that kind of deal. And there were people that were like, cool, take an axe, go outside, start chopping down trees, like, I'm gonna build me a pirate ship. And they build this crappy pirate ship, and them and some friends from their town get together, and they're like, all right, cool, let's raise a flag and go out to sea. And so then I'm sure you had a bunch of people that were like that, and so they probably didn't get very far, but maybe you would have had a few people that had some money, or had some knowledge about, you know, shipbuilding and stuff, a few people that were maybe a little bit smarter, and they were like, okay, we can actually do this. So they have a decent ship and decent provisions, and they have a decent navigator, and they set out to sea, and they might have even made it to the Grand Line, and then immediately got wiped out. And then there's another group of people that were even smarter and more strong, and they were knowledgeable of things, and they actually got into the Grand Line, and they lasted a little while, and then they got wiped out. And, you know, like, this was like hundreds, thousands of so-called pirate crews went out to sea, and that was all because of the goal that Roger set. Something else that I need to mention here is that the world government, specifically during the Reverie arc, the Gorosei, they mentioned that they had done these purges before in the past, right? Like every so often they decide to do a purge or whatever. Because there's this like prophecy or something involving Joy Boy and like the beginning of this new era, you know, like Joy Boy's return or the revival of the ancient weapons, like the era will change, and this is the era we're in right now. It would have been interesting to see that like the world government knew about this prophecy, and they wanted to stop it by any means, and that's the reason they wanted to execute Roger the way they did, execute him in Logtown, in the East Blue, the place he was born, and, you know, the East Blue is a symbol of harmony and peace, because the world government knew about this prophecy. At least Eam probably does. And he's like, you know, okay, apparently in the next few decades, there's going to be this new era of pirates. Well, we're going to just end that right here. You know, we're going to execute Roger, who's the king, and Rox's crew is long gone. They've been wiped out at God Valley, so we're going to stop this from happening. But inadvertently, you could say it's like maybe a problem with like fate or something. You know, fate can never be changed. You know, the future can never be altered. I think that's kind of cliche or whatever, but it's through the execution of Roger that resulted in the Great Pirate Era that they feared so much. So that's why they might be talking about this purge right now. Like, oh man, this Great Pirate Era has been going on for 20 years. It's getting out of hand, man. And there's even different generations in the pirate era, because the Great Pirate Era started 24 years ago. You know, also with the birth cry of an infant child born. And it was Duval! You know, Duval, with the mighty cry, brought in the era of the Great Pirate Age. Anyway, you got pirates that headed out right at the beginning of the Great Pirate Era, and then, you know, maybe like 10 years later they set out, you know, inspired by the first group that set out, and now you have this era setting out, you know, like Zeph and his Cook pirates. I think they set out, you know, after the Great Pirate Era started, and now it's like he had the logbook and everything, and he offered to give it to Luffy and stuff, but they decided not to, right? Yeah, because I think Zeph and Sanji, their backstory when they were stranded on the rock, I think that was when Sanji was like 11, so that was like 8 years ago or something. So yeah, Zeph probably started his pirate crew, you know, right after Roger died. Same thing with Moria, same thing with Crocodile. They started their pirate careers right at that point. And there's other pirates that are inspired by those pirates that are doing it now, right? So there's even different generations in that era. But yeah, the world government, I don't think they really like to push that purge button very often, because that's like a big thing, a change in the world, like pushing that purge button. They might even have an ancient weapon that uses, like, that's what the purge is. They push a button and they use Uranus or something to destroy an island or a bunch of islands and wreck the world, and they write it off as a natural disaster, and they kind of just start over. It's not something they do lightly, but with the situation getting the way it is, they might have to bust out the purge button again. You know what I'm saying, right? So yeah, it's just great to think about that, like that kind of idea in One Piece, that idea of romance that Oda is so much in love with, you know, Romance Dawn and everything like that. And just like, you know, this was a man that, you know, discovered pretty much everything the world had to offer, as was stated in, you know, the little poem that is ever recited every time you hear about Roger's execution. Like, he found everything about the world, and his last act of life was inspire a bunch of other people to go out there and continue his legacy, right? I think Roger knew at that point, he knows, like, okay, what I'm going to do is going to result in a lot of shit. It's going to result in the world government becoming a lot more bloodthirsty, and the Marines are going to be, you know, wiping out a lot more places and everything like that. But I think this is what needs to happen in order for the world to change in a major way. You know, I need to basically just, like, I'm almost there. Like, here's the point in the timeline where everything's going to change, and then here's where Roger died. And then here's like 800 other years of the world government controlling everything from the Void Century, and then like Roger made it to right here. And he's like, we're so close. We're so close. Now, I'm going to have a kid that's going to go out there in the world, and he's going to maybe make waves, but there's one more thing I can do. I can do that one last push to get everybody out there to really kickstart this new era, to welcome in the return of Joy Boy, or, you know, whatever that's going to entail. Whatever Odin spoke about as well. And so that was what Roger's last act of life was. So I like the idea of the Great Pirate Era. It's one of those things in One Piece that's mentioned so much, we kind of just treat it as like background noise sometimes. Like, oh yeah, Great Pirate Era, we all know that. I think there was even a moment in the anime where the anime, like every episode started off with like, this is the dawn of the Great Pirate Era. And that went on for like hundreds of episodes. And after a while, you're just like, yeah, Great Pirate Era. Okay, obviously. But it really was the tipping point there. It was like everything before that, and then Great Pirate Era, and then this is the situation we're in right now. So is there going to be a new era after it's all over, after Luffy becomes the Pirate King? Is he gonna like walk out with his, like, with the One Piece or his crown or whatever? He's probably not gonna have a crown, but you know what I mean, walk out and be like, this is the beginning of a new era, the era of meat. We all eat meat every day, all day, you know, all vegetables are banned, you know. But no, is he gonna be like, this is a new era, you know, because the One Piece has been discovered, but there's even more great mysteries in the world. Maybe the era of space, They'll discover there's space pirates. Well, there are space pirates. And space treasure, which if there's space pirates, there's got to be space treasure, right? So there you go. There'll be a whole new era of space pirates after this is all over. Anyway, thanks for watching the video, everybody. This will be Tekking and Barry, Cloneberry, signing out. The dawn of the new era!